Okay, that should be good. Okay. All right, folks. My name is Gamal Hennessy, and I'd like to welcome you to the GlobalComix Digital Marketing Webinar. We'll open up the floor to questions at the end. So if you type in your question in the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, we can address your questions then. If you see a question that you want to ask, but it's already been typed in, feel free to give it a thumbs up so we can be sure to get to it. If you think of any questions after the webinar, or if you want to get your comics onto the GlobalComix platform, please feel free to email me at the address on the screen, and I'll take care of you. The head of our business development is going to be handling the video presentation for this event. So every once in a while, you might hear me ask him to move to the next slide, like right now. Now, the purpose of this discussion is to help everyone establish a baseline understanding of marketing principles and then help you apply those same principles to your digital comic book marketing. So first, I'm going to explain the steps that go into finding, connecting, and communicating with your target market. Then I'll outline the GlobalComix tools that can assist you in your digital marketing efforts. Finally, I'm going to invite all of you to apply these methods to your own comics together with us over the summer. Now, before we start discussing marketing theories, it makes sense to think about where marketing fits in the business of publishing comics. There are several steps in the pre-production, production, and post-production cycles, whether you're talking about print comics, graphic novels, or web comics. See, marketing is an element of pre-production in comic book publishing, and it needs to start after you've established the foundation for your book, owning the ideas, building the team, and so on, but before the comic is actually created, because understanding your market will help you figure out what comic to make and where to distribute it. Now, digital marketing is one aspect of your marketing options, but it can work hand in hand with in-person and print marketing because the foundation principles are the same. Whatever kind of book you're making, marketing is an essential element to the publishing process and can mean the difference between financial success or failure of any comic. And when we talk about marketing in this context, we mean the activities of creating satisfying relationships with your customer. As a publisher, you need to spend time finding, connecting, and building bonds with the people who are most likely to be interested in your project. Now, in normal periods, not impacted by a global pandemic, there are more than 100 print releases of every week of comics, and far more web comics and digital releases every month. So if you simply release a title without building a market first, it's easy for your book to get lost in the continuous wave of content. Now, anyone who was around in the 1980s is probably familiar with the tagline from the film Field of Dreams, even if you don't remember the movie. The tagline was, "If you build it, they will come." Now, in the past, this idea largely applied to comics. Fans took it upon themselves to hunt down comics, navigate the comic shop, educate themselves on different characters, writers, and artists, build communities, and spread the words about comics largely on their own. Unfortunately, modern comics don't have the same luxury. If you don't market your book effectively, chances are that very few people will read it. Now, the good news is, that digital marketing for comics can be accomplished without any major financial investment outside the cost of your website. But it does require a time commitment. About 5 to 20% of the time you spend on your comic should be spent marketing. So let's say you spend 10 hours a week on your comic, you should spend at least 2 of those hours as part of your marketing efforts. We'll talk about what you should be doing during that time later, but first we're going to figure out how to find the right readers for your book. Many of the marketing decisions that you make are going to depend on the story that you're telling. So it helps to have a clear synopsis of your comic before you think about your reader. A useful synopsis answers 6 key questions, often referred to as the 5 W's and 1 H. So that's who, what, when, where, why, and how. Once you know what your story is about, it will be easier to imagine the ideal reader for your comic. Now, part of the materials that we emailed you earlier include the story synopsis form on page 2 of your PDF. So after this webinar, please feel free to use that for each one of your comics to understand these questions. Now, a few years ago, Stephen King wrote a book about his craft called On Writing. One of the major concepts in that book revolved around the idea of the ideal reader, which in this context is a theoretical model used to describe the type of person who would enjoy reading your comic. The name that we use for the overall group of ideal readers is your target market. Now, not everyone can be an ideal reader. Your comic can't appeal to everyone in the same way every movie doesn't appeal to everyone, and every music fan doesn't enjoy every type of music. You can understand the profile for your ideal reader based on the 4 factors you see on the screen. Demographics focus on external or physical factors like race, religion, education, etc. Psychographics focus on mental and emotional factors, as well as a general worldview. This includes things like politics, interest, and entertainment references. Genre focuses on the style of content and the stories they like to read, whether that's comedy, sci-fi, war, etc. And generation is the age group that your story is written for, whether that's toddlers, young adults, or any combination. So the answer to who your ideal reader is can be found in the elements of your story, because people like to see themselves in the content they consume. They want to be able to sympathize, or at least empathize with the characters and their struggle. They also have to be able to absorb the content on a mental or emotional level. For example, one of the reasons that have been used to explain the success of films like Black Panther and Wonder Woman is the introduction of lead characters that weren't historically included in the genre before, and therefore attracting new fans to the film. Now, when we talk about matching your story to a specific group of people, keep in mind that it's better from a creative and long-term success standpoint to develop a story that you love and then find the right audience for that story, rather than try to choose a desirable audience and then reverse engineer a story to fit them. For example, you could decide that you're going to make a comic about billionaires who own private jets because you see them as a high-income group who will spend a lot on your comic. But if you don't believe in that story, you don't connect with that group, it's going to be very difficult to make that marketing effort work. Now, if you look at the ideal reader profile analysis page on page 3 of your PDF, you'll see that we've given you a lot of categories you can apply to your book. I'd just like to point out that you only need to focus on those elements that are actually an aspect of your story. You don't have to worry about any demographic or psychographic that isn't relevant to your synopsis. For example, there was a recent graphic novel called Bingo Love about the romantic relationship between 2 African-American women in a conservative religious community in the 1950s. Because gender, race, and religion are fundamental aspects of the story, they need to go into the ideal reader analysis. By contrast, a story like The Killing Joke doesn't revolve around any of these factors, so they aren't relevant in that case. Also, if you scroll down to the genres, keep in mind that these are based on the theory of megagenres in Robert McKee's seminal book, Story, which I recommend any comic book creator to read for the development of their books. Now, many of these genres, like comedy, crime, science fiction, and war, have dozens of subgenre variations that can be more specific to your story. Also, genres can be combined to create even more specific concepts. So, for example, a story like Blade Runner can be defined as a cyberpunk neo-noir, which combines a subcategory of science fiction with a subgenre of mystery. Where a story like Frank Miller's 300 is a historical war comic that includes heavy doses of ancient European martial arts. The actual combinations are endless, and they aren't limited by what you see in Form 3. And finally, for this form, since most of the stories are based on other stories or events that you're exposed to, it helps to list all of your inspirations as part of the ideal reader profile, because this will help you get a handle on who your competition might be. See, in the modern entertainment industry, your ideal reader is going to have multiple choices on where they spend their time and money. So your book is going to have to compete with the other books that appeal to your ideal reader. Understanding who your competition is will help you understand what they might be missing and what you can provide. Now, the good news is that because your story isn't targeting everyone, you're not in direct competition with every comic book ever created. You only have to analyze the comics that appeal to your ideal reader. So if you do research on various comic book databases, you can determine which comics appeal to a similar ideal reader. For example, if you're making a zombie comic in a dystopian apocalypse, you need to consider The Walking Dead a competitor. By the same token, a modern urban-based superhero comic has to consider every other comic in that space as a competitor. Now, there are two ways to analyze your comic in relation to the competition. The first is an ideal reader comparison, where you look at the demographic, psychographic, genre, and generational factors of your comic in relation to your competitors. Now, in the areas where there's a clear difference, you can set yourself apart in your marketing messages and target a more specific type of ideal reader. For example, let's say you're doing a horror book about Chinese vampires. A research for vampire comics will reveal an avalanche of titles all related to classic European vampires, but fewer competitors in your specific demographic and genre. So that could be the point of difference that your comic needs to stand out. Now, a broader type of analysis for your competition is referred to as SWOT, which is SWOT, not SWAT, which stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. SWOT compares your book to the competition in terms of both the ideal reader comparison and outside factors, including the popularity of the characters in the book, the creative team working on the book, the size of the publisher putting out the book, and other factors that are unrelated to the specific story synopsis. For example, let's say you wanted to do a comic about a wealthy man that survives a tragic criminal event and then decide to use his money to acquire the skills and technology to fight crime outside the law. A SWOT analysis of that story would quickly reveal that not only has your story been done in one form or another dozens of times over the last 80 years, but it is also the basis for one of the most popular characters in modern culture. Now, a SWOT analysis should not deter you from making any comic that you really want to make, but it should give you an idea of how hard or easy it might be to attract readers away from the competition and towards your book, assuming they had to make a choice. Now, we've provided a form to capture all that information in form 3 of the PDF. But if you have more than 3 competitors in your market, and most oftentimes you will, feel free to add as many entries as you need. Now, because the competition forces every comic book publisher to fight for a limited number of readers, creating a larger group of readers is key to the success of every comic. According to some recent statistics, only 4% of the US population reads comics on a regular basis. So there's a lot of potential for growth in the overall comics market and for your book in particular. But before you can appeal to new comic readers, there are historical and systemic obstacles you need to consider and overcome in your marketing messages. Now, when we talk about barriers to entry, we mean the fact that potential comic book readers may not know who makes comics they like, what comics are available, where to buy them, or why they should read them instead of doing something else. A lot of times they don't even know how to read a comic because they don't have that background. And since it's easier for them to avoid comics rather than seek out the answers to those questions, you have to provide those answers to get them over that challenge. Relative price is a comparison between how much it costs to buy comics versus other forms of entertainment. For example, $20 will get you 5 issues of a Daredevil comic, or a couple of hours of reading, depending on how fast you read. The same $20 might get you 2 months of Netflix, with potentially thousands of hours of entertainment, including, but not limited to, 36 hours of Daredevil. Isolated distribution is the idea that comics are no longer universally available to buy, as they were in the past when newsstands were a reality. If a potential reader doesn't seek out a comic book shop, bookstore, library, convention, or a comic book app, they may never encounter the comics that they want to buy. Perception stigma is a problem that comics have had since the 1950s and books like Seduction of the Innocent. Comics are still seen in some circles as a substandard form of entertainment, in spite of the fact that comic book related content is insanely popular as films, televisions, video games, and even theater. Finally, your potential reader has established patterns of behavior that at this point don't include interacting with comics. They're not at the comic book shop on Wednesdays, and they don't have a comic book app on their phone. If you can't alter those patterns, it's difficult to sell those people comics. Now, the tools of digital marketing that GlobalComix provides can overcome each of the barriers to both engage current comic book readers and recruit new readers in ways that we're going to look at a little bit later. But when you're considering where new readers come from, you can divide the world into 4 distinct groups in relation to your book. Each group will have qualities that make them more or less probable to join your market and enjoy your work based on their relationship to your medium, which is comics, and your message, which is the specific story that you're trying to tell. If you look at the upper left-hand corner, you'll see the core market. This is the group of people that enjoys reading comics and they enjoy the type of story that you're telling. The good news is that this will be your most passionate fan base once you've established a relationship with them. The bad news is, as you can see by the image, that it's going to be the smallest group. And you're also going to have to compete with that with other books that appeal to that target market because they're already reading comics. The potential market on the right enjoys the type of story you're telling, but they don't read comic books yet. For example, if you have an adult-oriented political fantasy comic, that might appeal to all the Game of Thrones fans. The good news is that a portion of those people can be inspired to read comics based on your story, and you won't have to share them with your competitors at first because by definition, they're not reading comics. The bad news is you'll have to expand your marketing efforts to reach those people, and you can only convert a portion of them to your market because of the challenges we talked about in the last slide. Now, I'd like to take a quick second to talk about the false market. This is a group of people that reads comics or even makes comics, but they are not interested in your type of comic. It might be tempting to market your book to those people, but ultimately it's not worth the effort in the same way it's not worth the effort to market a 5-star steakhouse to a community of vegetarians and vegans. Finally, the non-market is a group of people that don't read comics and they don't like the type of story you're telling. This is going to be the vast majority of the population that you are surrounded by. But the good news is you can avoid wasting time and resources on them because even if you could reach them with your message, they probably won't read your comic anyway. So the takeaway from this concept is to focus your attention on the core market and the potential market and just ignore everyone else. Now, the goal of comic book marketing is to transform ideal readers into true fans. A true fan is the person who will buy everything that you publish. If an ideal reader is a theoretical model, a true fan is a real person that you find, forge a connection with, and build a relationship with. The key to this transformation is understanding the counterintuitive idea that people do not want to read your comic. They really don't want to read any comics. What they want, hold on one second. What they want is the feeling your comics can give them. On a fundamental level, human beings satisfy many of their desires indirectly. So they need an intermediary to get the feelings that they want. So if I'm hungry, it's hard for me to instantly not be hungry unless I take the intermediate act of eating something. On a more meta level, most of the people listening to this webinar are not listening to it just because they want to hear me talk. You want to have successful comics, and you've decided that listening to this talk is an indirect step to take you where you need to be. So as a comic book publisher, understand that your comic book is a delivery mechanism for your story, but your story needs to be a source of the feeling that the ideal reader is looking for. A powerful way to connect your comic to your reader's desires is through what we call a hook, which in this case is an image or a message that promises to give the reader the feelings that they want. Now, a classic example of a hook in comics can be found in the concept of Captain America #1, if you look at it as a historical example, because young men in the early 1940s were anxious about the war in Europe and unsure about America's ability to deal with the German threat. So Marvel appealed to that type of American male by taking a muscular young man, literally wrapping him in the American flag and showing him punch Hitler in the mouth. Readers were hooked, and the character became a staple of pop culture to this day. So remember, people consume the content that they identify with. So your marketing messages need to appeal to readers' self-image and emotions as much as the product itself. Anyone who remembers the commercials of the most interesting man in the world will remember that the commercials barely mentioned the products in the ad, but the campaign was still very successful for Dos Equis, even though they never talked about the beer, how it tasted, how much it cost, or anything else. So Now that you understand who your ideal readers are and what they want, you have an advantage when it comes to marketing to them online. See, because the granular subcultures that people divide themselves into online, the topics they follow, the people that they listen to and trust, the things that they buy and the sites that they visit can all help you find your target market. The ability that you have to comment, post, chat, blog, and share content makes it possible for you to communicate with your market on a consistent basis and overcome all the challenges to market expansion that I mentioned before. Your understanding of what appeals to them allows you to match your story and your images to their interests. And the social proof that you gain from an extended interaction with them is what's going to convert your ideal readers into your true fans. Now, if you look at Form 4 in the PDF, you'll be able to translate your understanding of your ideal reader into concrete strategies and tactics to build your marketing program. The traditional online marketing tools that can be used to achieve particular goals for your comic are listed on the screen. Social media could help you find your target market. A website could be the essential destination for your comic. Your mailing list can help you maintain communication with your target. And things like search engine optimization, online advertising, and video promotions can all be used to supplement and enhance your core marketing efforts in a digital space. As a publisher, the more you can coordinate all these tools, the easier your marketing efforts will be. Now, GlobalComix provides several tools to enhance your marketing. So we're not just another site to upload your comics to. For social media, we provide functions on your publisher page in the same way that you have a social media page. So you can interact with your target market as often as you like, in the same manner that you would on Facebook or Twitter or Reddit. There are also links that we create that allow you to, or your readers, to instantly share anything you put on your publisher page and drive more traffic to your comics. In terms of just a pure website, we offer a home for your comics that can be accessed without the friction of a comics-related app. We also provide you with the ability to monetize your comics on a per-page basis, which is different than the way other comic book apps allow you to sell your comics. This can help you attract readers with compelling free portions of your content in the same manner that a movie trailer can be used to attract people to watch a movie. You could do the same thing with a portion of your comic and then sell the rest of your book. Finally, as you generate readers and followers, every new post on your publisher page instantly generates an email notification for all of the true fans that follow your comics. So when you have a new release or a new announcement, all of them will know about it instantly because you've created a seamless mailing list that you don't have to maintain. On the back end, GlobalComix also gives you the ability to understand exactly how your marketing efforts are translating ideal readers into true fans. Because we allow you to track unique visits, sources of traffic, and page views, you can measure every marketing action you take over time. This takes the guesswork out of marketing and gives you the ability to duplicate tactics that work and avoid the stuff that doesn't. By tracking page views and panel views, you can understand reader behavior inside your comic to a very high degree. This can help you determine how to structure your future stories and how each page of your story and each character in your story resonates with readers. Just to give a real-world example, we recently ran an experiment with one of our publishers who specialize in Christian-themed comics. So the focus there was on demographics. We found several Christian-related Facebook groups that weren't focusing on comics, created a one-day promotional campaign, and measured the results of the post in terms of page views. Based on that one-day experiment, our publisher got an increase in page views of almost 400%. In theory, sustained engagement with those groups over time could maintain and even increase those daily numbers, creating a situation where that publisher is able to get tens of thousands of page views on their comic per month without going after the general public or even trying to appeal to the general comic book public as a whole. Now, the reason we wanted to have this webinar is because GlobalComix is committed to the success of each of our publishers. We feel that if each publisher can build a viable digital publishing business individually, then all the publishers on the platform can benefit as well, in much the same way that a small number of YouTube stars can thrive, but raise the visibility of all videos on the platform as a result. So in order to put this information to work and develop best practices for online marketing, we're planning to partner with some of our publishers over the summer to help them build a marketing plan and test it in the wild. So if you're interested in getting involved in this program, here's what you need to do. Create an account on GlobalComix if you haven't done so already, and upload some of your comics. This process is very simple, very straightforward, and very easy. Next, fill out some of the forms provided and send them to us at gamal@globalcomics.com. And then from there, we'll set up a time for an initial meeting and walk you through all the steps that we talked about today, but in reference to your specific comic. After that, we're planning a follow-up webinar in August to share and discuss the results of the summer program and offer best practices to all of our publishers. We're gonna open up the call for questions now. And we're also gonna send a survey so that you can share your opinions about our presentation. So before we actually get into it, thank everyone for listening to me babble for about a half an hour. And we hope this helps you with your comic book publishing. All right, let me look at the questions, see what you got. Okay, so I think it's time that I see actually about half a dozen questions, and I'm gonna start to answer those. So if you have any other questions, please type them in and I will get to them as soon as possible. So Alex, you asked about the databases that you should look in. The places that you should probably look are all the major places where comic books are sold. So you're gonna look at Comixology, you're gonna look at Amazon, you're gonna look at Google, Comics Vine, you can look at Wikipedia, you can look at, if you're into webcomics, you have to look at all the webcomics platforms. So it's Webtoons, Tapas, and things like that. And every one of those has a search engine to some degree, so you can actually take the concepts for your comic, demographic, psychographic, and especially genre, and apply them to the search engine, and it will actually pull out a lot of the books that you'll need, so then you can do your ideal reader comparison and your SWOT analysis. I hope that answers the question. Let's see. How would a comic creator introduce reading a comic or graphic novel who don't read or understand? Okay, James, your question was, how would a comic creator introduce reading a comic to readers who don't understand how in order to gain their interest? And what methods would be useful for doing so? What I would say is you should go with the basic concept that if people can actually read a meme, which is basically an image and a story put together, then they can read a comic. If you provide them with examples in the feed, you can show them how if they're already reading memes, they're actually already reading comics. The other example that you can use for them is something like comic strips. Like you take a Calvin and Hobbes, you take a Far Side, you take anything else that people are used to reading because it's just a left to right kind of image and text. People will become more involved in understanding how to read comics. You don't have to go into the complex things about explaining what a gutter is, what they're supposed to do with a gutter, because their mind over time will understand that process in the same way if you were starting to read comics, nobody explained the gutter to you, but you figured it out. Let's see. Let's see, Victor, do you believe the ideal reader can change or evolve through internal story-based ideas? Yes, well, the ideal reader was gonna change every time your book changes. So if you actually introduce new concepts, new characters, new storylines, then the ideal reader can change slightly. What you want to avoid is going into a situation where you are radically changing the ideal reader for a book in midstream. So all of the people who are reading the book and enjoying the book can you want to actually let them know that you're going in a new direction, and either do that gradually or start a new story where people are actually understanding, okay, we're going in a new direction, and you want to do that in your marketing before the book comes out. So that's a very specific type of thing where you, before you make a narrative change, you actually want to think about how it actually impacts the ideal reader specifically. Let's see, Mike, we're asking people to jump on trends or use current events. I am actually not asking, I'm specifically not asking people to jump on trends or to use current events to give the comic a boost. If you're actually talking about a specific type of comic and a specific type of story, I'm talking about finding the group of people who actually like that story. It is a mistake to jump on trends in comics simply because the time frame of a lot of comics, especially if you're doing a traditional industrial type process, you're going to miss the trend and it's not going to help. The fact of the matter is there are specific groups of people who like specific things. And if you actually introduce your book to those people, you have a higher chance of them enjoying the book. It may have nothing to do with current affairs. It may have nothing to do with trends. It just has to do with focusing your story, the elements of your story, on the people who might like it. There shouldn't be any kind of reference to trends in there at all, really. Jennifer, is this for comic publishers only or for comic creators individually? It is actually for anyone who is creating a comic. If you'd like to actually get your comic read by the largest group of people possible, then it doesn't make a difference if you're making a print comic, a graphic novel, a web comic, a motion comic. However, whatever comic you have, you're going to be telling some type of story. Whatever story is in your comic, there is an ideal reader for that story, and you should match your story to the reader. It's not about actually matching the distribution channel to the reader. So it's not about digital comics or print comics or, I mean, cigarettes or bubble gum, really. It's about matching what you're offering to who really wants it, and then trying to build that connection through the hook to let people know, the people who like that kind of thing, know that you're offering that kind of thing. Hope that helps. Omar, who is the authority of the storybook? Story was written by a gentleman named Robert McKee. The book is actually, the fundamentals of the book are actually geared towards screenwriting, but the concepts in the book actually apply to any type of narrative art, including comics. So when he talks about narrative threads and story structure and genre, all of the things he talks about actually apply directly to comics, which is why I always suggest people read that book when they're making comics. Johnny, other digital comic platforms have a release schedule format for optimal viewership. Does GlobalComix have the same? Yes, you can actually schedule the day and time of your release for every one of your releases. So let's say you've built up a library of like 20 or 30 webcomics and you want to release them in a sequence. You can actually schedule each one of those releases to come out when you've determined the optimal viewership is. Now, you may have to do some testing to figure out when you get the biggest spike, but we'll allow you for every release to actually time it so it actually helps you the most, so you don't have to like do it on a manual basis.
I'm going to jump in on this one.
Okay.
Christopher, I'm the CEO and creator of GlobalComix. I wanted to do justice specifically to this question because it also is a question of discoverability inside of our system. And I think what you're also asking is that Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, etc. schedule that you see on the homepage and Webtoons, does GlobalComix have anything like that? Yes, it is in the works. And one of the things that we're looking at doing is making that something that scales all the way from a single creator having a preset release schedule all the way to platform wide. And so being able to actually filter by language or types of content, etc. And it would be something that I'd expect to see go live within Q3.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Stephanie, I appreciate it, especially hearing on how to manage, here we go. How to manage time spent in the core market, but should we not also have in mind sometimes stories about breaking barriers, creating new readers who might not have felt welcomed in? Get a surprise audience. Well, if you actually think back to when I was talking about core market and potential market, your potential market is that group of, that's the where you'll be breaking barriers and creating new readers, because they by definition are not reading comics. They simply like the type of story that you're telling. So the core market is the people that you know have a high chance of reading your comic. And the potential market is the people who might like your comic if they were exposed to it. You're also going to, in the concept of a target market, there will be casual fans, people who just stumble upon it, people who buy it for whatever reason, but you can't actually, for a viable business, you can't count on a random person finding your comic. It's up to you to actually go out and really take the strengths of your comic and match them to the people who might like it. But there will be a group of new readers that you can find, because a lot of the population, at least in America, isn't reading comics. What percentage of the, John Edwards, what percentage of the comic reading audience is currently reading digitally versus print? And do readers seem to utilize one format over another? The percentage of people, according to ICV2 and Comicron, is it's about an 80-20 split at this point. So 80% of the revenue coming into comics is coming from print comics currently. 20% of the revenue is coming in digitally. But keep in mind, when you're talking about revenue streams in comics, you're talking about an estimation at best, because a lot of the times we don't actually know who is buying comics or who is actually reading comics because of the way comic books are sold. But it's, the rough estimate at this point is an 80-20 split. There is some people who prefer print, and there's some people who prefer digital for a lot of different reasons, whether it's the tactile nature, whether it's a space consideration, whether it's convenience of carrying around their entire catalog with them at all times. So, but even if you're only focusing on the digital or you're only focusing on the print, the concepts are the same in terms of digital marketing, because you have to be able to reach out to the people in that case who not only like your story, but like the format of story that you are telling. So if like you really have a strong, your story really appeals to print people and you only put it in digital, you are shooting yourself in the foot. That makes sense. Does it cost anything to publish a
let me add one more thing to that, Gamal.
Sure.
Thank you. I think that, you know, when you're talking about the percentage of comic readership, it depends a lot on location and country and language and format and age of the reader, etc. And let me qualify what I mean when I say that. So like, it was 2017 that Japan, all of their manga sales was 55% digital. And so the majority of their sales had moved from print into the digital space. When you look at the United States and North America, and to much extent Europe, those numbers are not even close to as high when you think about traditional format comics. But when you think about comics that are originating on the internet first, web comics, things that are being published on Instagram, things that are being published on individual websites, etc., those audiences are very often not the same as the audiences that you'd find in the traditional media space. And so even taking that in mind, you know, I think that if I were to do a future prediction, the kids that are growing up with digital devices, you know, phones or tablets or whatever, and coming into 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13 today, are the people that are going to be looking first at a digital space in order to find their entertainment. Now, it might be that some of them convert into being super fans and enthusiasts and start collecting print and so on and so forth. But on the broader scale of things, getting introduced to stories that are not necessarily local, or not necessarily even in your country or continent, those opportunities are and those people are going to get introduced to those stories online first and foremost, and then potentially evolve.
Cool. I actually see a few of the same type of questions, so I'm going to try to answer them in bulk. Does GlobalComix have monthly fees to use? No. You can upload your comics onto GlobalComix right now for free. There is no fee. In fact, if you actually set it up so that you are charging for your comics, we would actually pay you when people start to read your comics. In terms of exclusivity, there is no exclusivity on GlobalComix. You could put your comics on GlobalComix and anywhere else that you like, but a lot of the tools that I talked about in terms of marketing and tracking what's going on and being able to promote your comics on a per page basis is something that you're going to be able to do on GlobalComix. You're not going to be able to do on other types of platforms. Let's see. Yes. How relevant are mailing lists in this day and age of social media? In fact, the actual open rate and conversion rate for mailing list relative to social media is exponentially higher, especially if you think about the concept that in social media, especially because it's a stream, whether you're talking about Facebook or Twitter or anything else, if someone's not actually there to see the post, it may pass them by in an instant. And then they may never actually see that post again. And if they do, a lot of other things are competing for their attention at the same time. The way the studies have actually gone for digital marketing in general, not just for comics, is that you get a much better what they call conversion rate on email than you do on social media. You get like a 10 to 15% conversion rate on email and like a 2 to 5% conversion rate on social media. And since a lot of the cost of mailing lists is relatively low compared to the cost of like social media advertising, you a lot of times get a better return on investment with a mailing list than you will on social media. But the good thing about GlobalComix is that it combines both of them together. So you could actually get your social media digital marketing and your mailing list digital marketing from the same place. What kind of comic book material can and cannot be uploaded? What is the review process? Basically, the material that can and cannot be uploaded is you cannot upload stuff that you do not own because nobody wants that. And there are some guidelines in terms of legal aspects. So like slander, libel, defamation, obscenity, things like that. But other than that, there is no specific type of content that you can or cannot put on GlobalComix. We actually want people to put as many different types of comics as they want to put on, because that's going to actually build up the largest group of people who want to read comics. The more types of comics there are, the more types of people will read comics.
You can also look in the footer of our website under the content policy, where everything is broken out and articulated for the do's and don'ts. And it should be pretty comprehensive. If you have any more questions for that one, feel free to give us a ping via the contact us link in the footer.
Okay, Michael, seems you have thousands of titles will soon be available. Is there a way for creators to stand out on the site? Purchasing ads, creating events, making trailers available. Chris, you want to take that one?
Oh, sorry, I was reading through a question. Which one?
It seems that there are thousands of titles available on GlobalComix. Advertising works, but is there a way to stand out? Can we purchase ads, create events, make trailers, etc.?
Yes, the biggest way to stay out is to be engaged with your audience, and to be engaged with your audience not only on GlobalComix, but everywhere else where your audience is, and to drive people constantly to your content and to engage with them literally. In the simplest form, it could be participating in a conversation or a discussion around, a specific set of events that happened in chapter 2. As folks start to build a followership around their titles, one of the first things that very often happens is that, the community gets together and they talk and they predict and they discuss the events of the story as it goes along. Participating in those, or even, just acknowledging that you're looking at the discussions, is a great way to encourage your community to continue doing that. Exactly. People feel appreciated and visible. Separately, I think you know, from a visibility perspective on GlobalComix, um, there's things that we do on a weekly and monthly basis with curation. And we're doing promotion with email newsletters and on our website with featured content, etc. If you want to kind of stand out outside of GlobalComix, there's nothing stopping you from doing, you know, your own digital advertising on other sites, whether it's Google ads or it's Facebook ads or wherever that might be, or running campaigns on Reddit, you know. But kind of to wrap that up is that the promotion and visibility really comes from being active with pushing content out. And so creators that are perpetually active and that are perpetually engaged and are putting out new content all the time are the ones that get the most visibility because they're always in the forefront of the reader's mind.
Cool. We have actually a creative question that I'd like to tackle from Challenge Games. Should the cover of a book give a hint about what the story is about, or should the cover image be as eye-catching as possible to gain the attention of larger groups of readers? I think this is actually a concept that is also included in Story, where they actually talk about the key image of any book or any scene or any story is the one image that should probably be used for the cover. If you're familiar with the classic Batman Death in the Family cover, it's very clear from that, the way the cover is designed, what that story is about, what it's actually offering to the reader when you see Batman holding Robin's bloody body in his hand. That's the book, it's the cover actually is the hook. It actually brings the people in. It is the promise that of the story that you are telling. In the same way I was discussing Captain America #1 earlier, your cover artist should actually know that they should understand the story well enough that they can create one image that kind of sells the entire story of the book without actually giving away the end of the book, because that's not helpful. Is GlobalComix adverse to their platform being used as a supplemental marketplace? Well, the reality of it is, if you can put your comics on GlobalComix or portions of your comics on GlobalComix for free, and then direct people to any other place that you like based on the way GlobalComix is set up, as long as you understand that you are creating what's called friction, the more steps people have to take to actually access your content, the more people you're going to lose in your sales funnel. So let's say you actually put a comic book on GlobalComix, and the first 3 pages were free, because that's where your turning point of your scene is. That's where your cliffhanger was. And then page 4, you're actually asking people to pay basically 5 cents to actually read page 4 and keep on reading. They don't have to go anywhere. They don't have to do anything. They just have to press a button. You're going to have more people actually going through that process. You're going to retain more people than if you give them the first 3 pages, tell them to stop, go to another app, or get up and go to a comic book shop to read the rest of the story. You're going to lose a lot of that audience that you actually built up by bringing them to GlobalComix. So to summarize, yes, you can, but no, it may not be the best thing to do to get the most people buying your comics.
Yeah, I think, you know, the best kind of measuring tool that you have for that is your readership. Like, if you're putting content online using GlobalComix as a medium for that distribution, and you're sharing that out to folks, are your readers and your audience going to walk away feeling like what you shared was not worth their time? In which case, it's probably not a good idea to do it, right? Like, even from your own brand building perspective. But to kind of address the question here around print media publishing, GlobalComix is actually very interested in finding a way where we can drive the folks that are looking for print versions when they are available to something like a Shopify or any online store that actually can fulfill that need. And by providing creators and publishers with the tools to surface that purchase physical option when that is available. Because we believe that, you know, there are people that really just want print, and that's cool. And there are people that really just only want to do digital, and that's cool too. And then there's a little bit of an overlap. But ultimately, the thing that like answers that question is, of why is because if the readers are happy, then creators are successful. And for us, it's most important to find a way to please readers in whatever format that they might be, even if that means sending folks to an online store to buy a physical copy.
Chris, I think this last one is for you too.
Oh, okay. Let's see. Does GlobalComix offer some kind of way to get emails back into your own email marketing provider? The answer to that is primarily no. There's one exception. Users that create accounts on GlobalComix, their personal information is always protected and theirs to own. We do not share that with anyone, neither third-party marketing providers for ourselves, nor do we sell that to anyone. The only exception to that is for certain kinds of promotions that creators and publishers can run on their own, where they can run promotions that, something like a code giveaway, where users can claim that code and get free access to specific pieces of content or all pieces of content, etc. There's an option around that to actually require the user to share their email address with the creator and publisher. And that would be the only time where you can get users' contact information directly. And it's one in which that they have to double opt into. And we feel like it's a fair game because they're getting free content from you, the creator, and you're getting their contact info in return.
Okay, the last question I see here, can a comic be revised or updated after it's uploaded, or is it fixed? Well, you actually have the ability to upload or take down any comic or any page that you decide to upload. So if you actually alter your comic after you had the initial upload, I think that's fine. The only thing that I would actually defer to Chris to make sure of is that the people who bought the original page that you then change, do they get access to the new page, or do they have to pay for the page again? And I don't know the answer to that question. Chris does.
Yes, so you can make revisions and updates to your comic after it's been published live. If you specifically delete pages, then the history for what people have purchased disappears. However, you can actually update the assets that are used inside of pages without deleting them. So you can, if you find somewhere where you made a mistake in your drawing or a mistake in the editing or whatever that might be, you can choose to specifically replace the underlying asset and ownership is retained. Additionally, because we do a little bit of intelligence on the content that is actually being uploaded, if you have something like a credits page that is used in 15 chapters and you realize that you made a mistake on that, you can replace that in one of them, and it'll give you a choice as to whether or not it should be replaced everywhere where that specific asset is used. And so you can actually make these batch updates if you're changing the same page in multiple places. The last kind of answer to that is that any new pages that you add after an issue is being released, users will not be notified for pages that are added to an already published release. They will be notified if you were to create a new release, etc. And so from a readership engagement perspective, if you are releasing on a schedule where it's something like 1 or 2 pages at a time, it might make more sense for you to use or to create new releases, even with that few pages in each, because the reading experience is entirely seamless. And you can go from page 1, release 1 to page 2, release 107, entirely seamless. I hope that answers your question.
Chris, I think that next question is for you too.
All right, let's see.
Yeah, they don't want to hear from me anymore. I'm done.
What can we do if someone screenshots the panels, crop it out, and upload your comic somewhere and say they made it from scratch? Well, I think this is a general question that is not just related to GlobalComix. I think this is about when you put content online, how do you ensure that you are the ownership and that people don't take credit for your work? The answer to that is it's complicated. If it's services that people are using to upload, you can always reach out to the admins of those services, whether it's Facebook or it's Reddit or it's Imager or whatever, and actually file a copyright claim on the content that was published out. If this is done on private websites that they're doing their own hosting, it's a little bit more tricky, and it depends on how much time and potentially money that you want to spend on it, and what country you're in, and what country they're in, etc. And I think this is kind of the general theme of all content that you put online, is that once it's online in one way or another, it is online. You just need to make sure that other people aren't profiting off of the content. And rather, you know, if people are sharing screenshots and using them as memes, for example, that might be great incidental marketing that you get, and not necessarily something that you need to worry about. If other people are publishing something and saying that it's them that did it, well, that's a whole different story, and you should find the right appropriate way of approaching it depending on where they were publishing. If it's a platform, as I mentioned, they usually have takedown steps and procedures where you can contact the owners or the businesses that are running the platforms. And last question. Johnny's asking if the YouTube enabled links are on the site yet. I wish, man, I wish. Hopefully in the next month. All right.
All right, folks. Thanks for everybody who actually showed up. There's going to be, like I said, the survey that goes out, and there will be following up with everyone probably early next week. So thank you and good night.